About anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View starts right now.
Across America, live, this is Point of View. And now, Dr. Merrill Matthews.
And welcome to Point of View. I'm Merrill Matthews, sitting in for Kirby Anderson today, and we have got a lot on the agenda today. In our weekend edition, we'll be discussing the government shutdown, who's that hurting, Republicans or Democrats, the election. It's a big victory for Democrats. The Supreme Court and the tariffs, that the briefing that happened on Wednesday, and the a new presidential ranking out. You may be surprised who some people believe are the best presidents. Joining me by phone is Liberty McArtor, Point of View's own Liberty. She is the host of the Know Why podcast and frequently appears on Point of View's Next Generation Roundtable. Also joining me by phone from Canada is the award-winning political theorist and policy expert, Will Barclay. He is an expert on international affairs. He is the parliamentary correspondent for the Western Standard, has been published in a number of areas, speaks frequently, and is an expert on right-wing political ideology. Liberty and William, thank you for joining us.
Great to be here.
Hi, thank you so much for having me. It's a pleasure to meet you.
Well, let's get into this because so much has happened this week. Let's start out with the government shutdown. It is in its 38th day, I believe, longest ever, and a lot of things are reverberating through the economy, and yet we don't seem to see an end to this. Liberty, has the shutdown been affecting you in any way?
Oh, well, I know that in our town, it's really affecting the work of our church. So, you know, I'm fortunate in that food insecurity isn't something that I'm having to deal with, but for so many people in our town, it is. Mm-hmm. And so the church I attend operates a food pantry that's local in a kind of rural but quickly growing area, serves about 3 or 4 counties. And so they have been talking about how they're open certain days of the week, and it has gotten to where people are lining up, you know, before the pantry opens, an hour or two before, and sitting in chairs waiting to make sure. And thankfully, again, where our church is very generous and there's many people in the community who are stepping up to partner with that ministry. But I think it just goes to show kind of the attitude of fear and uncertainty that so many people have right now, because they don't know if they're going to be able to pay for groceries. And so thankfully I'm not having to fly anywhere. I'm still, able to get food, but for a lot of people around me, it really is affecting them.
You know, Liberty, I watch the local news every evening, and they frequently just lead off with some of the organizations that are providing food assistance out there, restaurants that are providing free meals, concerns about the SNAP benefits. That's the money that goes to people to help low-income people buy food. And so it looks like for a lot of families, we're talking about roughly 40 million people, this is a real struggle for them right now.
Yeah, it is. And so, again, it's a good reminder, too, for people who just say, I don't know what they're doing in Washington, D.C., but practically, donate to your local food ministry, see if there are things like that to do. But, I mean, yeah, people, obviously, that we work with. I have family coming in town this weekend. So far, her flight's not canceled, but we'll see. And so there is a lot of just things that are up in the air right now. And so I think people are just ready. They just want somebody to end it at this point.
Yeah, I agree with you. Will, you're in Canada. Are you seeing any effects from this in Canada?
No, we're pretty captivated by the budget right now. It's just been released over the past couple of days, and kind of the uptick in our national debt and then spending of that really entails. I think, though, that when I look at the shutdown, one thing that really jumps out to me, funny enough, is a Zoran Mondani quote that Ms. Liberty herself actually touched on previously. And this is his statement, his notion there's nothing too big or too small for government to take care of. Mm-hmm. And it's absolutely abhorrent. I think this notion there's nothing too small for government to attend to. I think this idea that we inevitably need some sort of collective action in order to also successfully confront or overcome life's problems, this represents obviously one of the most fundamental differences between Democrats and Republicans. But I actually want to dig just a little bit deeper on it because I think it's ultimately very important in our quest, let's say, to recapture the humanity of the other as we gaze out in the face of Nietzsche's abyss. When we're all children, I think we're inevitably and immediately inculcated with two premises. One, that everyone is special and utterly unique, and two, that people are all equal. And so this is just my opinion, but I think ultimately the tension between these two premises becomes too much to bear within the head of any reasonable child, let's say. And so they are inevitably forced to pick one of the two premises. And whosoever decides that everyone is all the same, they inevitably deviate towards communism and socialism because to them any problem, no matter how small, cannot be confronted by an individual or individuals on their own, but always requires some sort of collective action. In contrast, though, everyone who embraces the, let's say, the utter uniqueness and beauty of all individual people ultimately embraces classical liberal values and ideology. Everything underlies America, as well as the constant endeavoring towards the good that comes along with it.
You know, one of the things that's been debated here is who is benefiting politically from the shutdown. And I think early on there was this sort of sense that Democrats were being hurt by the shutdown. After the elections, that seems to have changed. Democrats seem to have some wind in their sail now and feel like they are doing okay. And I've seen articles. We've got a couple of them actually posted on pointofview.net. I'd encourage you to go take a look at them as they discuss who's sort of winning and losing from this, apart from the American people, but politically. And there are quotes from Democrats who are saying, you know, we think we're winning on this, and we don't see any reason to come to the table and negotiate a resolution of this. Liberty, I thought at first that we would probably see, you know, it might go on for a week or two. It didn't. It went on much longer. I thought maybe, along with a lot of people, that once the election was over, that maybe Democrats, I know they were using it for a fundraising tool to raise and to bring awareness to the elections, but I thought maybe after the election was over, we'd see some kind of resolution to this, but I don't see anything happening right now.
Yeah, I almost think that Democrats are digging in their heels, and kind of to Will's point, maybe a lot of the more radical side of the party thinks that, okay, we are going to embrace this new vision of government ultimately solving all the problems. And, you know, we are not going to give up on that, on being able to spend more to meet Americans' needs and making Republicans out to be the bad guy for cutting down on the budget.
And, you know, Trump has come out. I've got a link to an article there where Trump met with some Republicans, I think Senate Republicans, on Wednesday or Thursday morning, and said, we're getting killed by this shutdown. And I think he sees the political ramifications in that. He was encouraging the Senate to end the filibuster, to vote to end the filibuster, the process of the filibuster, and so that they could get the government funded with a majority vote in the Senate, in essence bypassing the filibuster. Senate Majority Leader John Thune is reluctant to do that, and he's told the president he just doesn't have the votes. So there are some Republicans who don't want to do this, and Republicans were opposed to this when Democrats were talking about it. So it's a real sticky issue because some of the Senate Republicans realize that at some point they're going to be in the minority again, and you may very well have a Democratic president. And in that case, you want to be able to have a Senate that can use the 60-vote filibuster to stop bad legislation from going forward. So I don't think Republicans are going to go along with that, but it certainly raises another challenge for them, even as President Trump thinks this is hurting Republicans. We've got links to some issues on this on pointofview.net. Stay with us. We'll be right back.
This is Viewpoints with Kirby Anderson.
In America, we are facing a housing divide. We talk about a digital divide that illustrates the gulf between those who have computers and the internet and those who don't. There's a growing divide between those who have homes and those who do not and may never own a home. Baby boomers are sitting on a staggering amount of housing wealth, estimated at $19 trillion worth of real estate. They hold nearly half of the nation's real estate wealth. This is due to decades of home ownership and rising property values. One survey found that 62% of baby boomers feel that they have gained more wealth from their homes than from their careers. For them, their home equity represents the primary source of retirement income. On the other hand, the latest statistics indicate the U.S. housing market has reached its most unaffordable level in history. Homeownership is moving further out of reach for most Americans. Record high home prices and high mortgage rates have combined to outpace wage growth. In fact, Americans need to earn about 70% more today than 6 years ago to afford the median price home. The latest report from Realtor.com shows that only 28% of homes currently for sale across the country are affordable for the typical U.S. household. This is attributed to an increase in the number of people who want to buy homes, coupled with the fact that developers have underbuilt. All of this may be true, but it ignores the obvious reason. The price of homes is going up because the value of the dollar is going down, and it takes more dollars to buy the same home a decade later. And as inflation rises, wages never keep up. The housing divide is due to a government spending too much and the Federal Reserve printing too much. I'm Kirby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
For a free booklet on a biblical view of anti-Semitism, go to viewpoints.info/antisemitism. Viewpoints.info/antisemitism. You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
And welcome back to Point of View. Joining me by radio is Point of View's Liberty McArtor, and joining me by phone also is William Barclay. He is a political theorist and policy expert. And Liberty, one of the things I think we've got to mention here is that on October 31st, Halloween night, Trump held a Great Gatsby party at Mar-a-Lago where people came in and they were dressed as flappers, and it was a costume party. And I've seen pictures of it. It's a big, apparently hundreds of people attended, very lavish. There were dancers and so forth, all sort of highlighting the Great Gatsby, which in the book by F. Scott Fitzgerald, the Great Gatsby put on very lavish parties. Of course, all of this was sort of in the book. It was an effort to highlight how the rich were just didn't understand what was happening with the poor and how the rich sometimes take advantage of the poor. I don't know that Trump understood all that, but it just, I don't care if the president has a party at Mar-a-Lago, but it seemed like just the optics looked really bad to me, given that he does that on the day before the SNAP benefits ends. I think that was ill. Now, he probably had this set in motion sometime before the government shutdown, but it just seemed like I don't know, it wasn't good optics.
Yeah, I think you make a great point. It's not good optics. One of the things, that you, like you mentioned, that you learn reading The Great Gatsby, or you should learn, is, the evils of excess, and thinking that you can just money can buy you anything. And so right before, 40 million Americans, if I am fitting that number correctly, who rely on food benefits are about to lose those and are worrying about whether or not they can buy groceries, and then have this extremely lavish party. It doesn't really make sense in terms of maybe that could have been rescheduled if you did care about optics. And traditionally, Trump has a pretty good sense for photo ops and things like that.
Yes, he does.
But I do think that's something that we're going to probably continue hearing about especially the longer this goes on, that we're going to hear from the other side for sure.
You know, Will, here in the States, we've had occasions where a politician was sort of didn't recognize the gravity of the moment and ended up doing something, whether it was in the pandemic or I remember Senator Ted Cruz was getting ready to go on a cruise or go on a vacation during the pandemic and got pushed back for that. Gavin Newsom, the governor of California, was in a lavish restaurant eating without mask during the pandemic and got criticized for that. And Karen Bass, the the mayor of Los Angeles, was in Africa when Los Angeles was on fire, and she didn't immediately come back, and they got a lot of pushback for that. And there in Canada, you had your own instance here recently where the head of Ontario published or sent out a commercial quoting Ronald Reagan about tariffs, and Donald Trump had his own reaction to that, and then your politicians had to sort of dial that back.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it very much highlights kind of the disjunct, let's say, between our federal government, our provincial government. What was funny, though, is Prime Minister was consulted and didn't know about the ad before it went out. Kind of whether or not he gave it its okay is kind of up for debate. He I think, is giving conflicting versions of this, along with the Premier of Ontario, Doug Ford. I think, though, that in a lot of ways, President Trump's tariffs have had their intended effect all around the world. They very much expose kind of the fundamental fallacy and utter instability of kind of the globalist paradigm and how much the success of the global economy and economies like Canada is very much predicated upon, in a lot of ways, or extracted upon even from America.
Yeah, it's been a it's been a problem, and we were going to talk about the tariffs, and so let's just go ahead and get into that issue now, because on Wednesday the Supreme Court heard arguments by the government and the challengers on the president's tariffs, and especially his use of a law that we refer to as IEEPA, which allows the president to declare emergency and under certain national emergencies do certain things with relation to foreign policy, but it never mentions tariffs in there. And so the challenge is that the president does not have the authority under the Constitution, which a tariff is a tax, and the Article 1 provides vests Congress with the ability to be able to tax, not the president. And so the argument is the president has exceeded his authority in imposing taxes around the world. The president has continually said that the other countries are paying these taxes. He walked that back just a little bit the day or two ago, saying, well, maybe the Americans do have to pay some of these. Americans pay virtually all of it. But at any rate, it's become an international issue. And how is that affecting you in Canada?
Well, prices for everything skyrocketed. I think in a lot of ways, I think it's collapsed a lot of economies here. We've lost incredible numbers of jobs. And I think the other thing that's really suffered here is innovation. Like in terms of collaboration, stuff we've been able to achieve with U.S. industries, all of that has evaporated almost overnight. I think, like I was saying, like tariffs have had their intended effect. They've exposed the fact that as much as here in Canada, we want to think of ourselves as one of these tier one nations, let's say, we're dependent still in a lot of ways on the benevolence and kind of goodwill of our historic allies and neighbors, the United States of America.
You know, it's interesting because Trump went into the tariff regime saying tariff wars are easy to win. It turns out, I think it's fair to say it was with a lot of smaller countries that are very dependent upon the U.S. and the U.S. buying their products. But with China and a few others, it hasn't been so easy to win.
No, it absolutely hasn't. Oh, please go ahead.
Oh, go ahead, Will. I want to hear what you have to say.
No, I was just going to say, I think that one of the things that we're really confronting is kind of there's these two conflicting paradigms, right, of, let's say, like billiard balls and spider webs. And I think that, let's say, post-Cold War, globalization has very much become a fundamental aspect of all international politics and economies, right? And a fundamental part of this is that this notion that states must transform themselves into an interconnected and independent spider web of post-national societies rather than remain an unconnected mass of billiard balls, which the World Economic Forums and all of the Church of Globalization, its apostles, they've equated with kind of the isolated and independent states of yesteryear and their protectionist policies. The thing is, though, if a billiard ball is hurled at other billiard balls, then although they'll certainly collide and crash together, all of them will inevitably come to rest somewhere, bothered, upset, but not at all broken. In contrast, though, if a web becomes ruptured or torn in any way by a rogue billiard ball or an errant Trumpian state, perhaps, then that whole web or network, well, it inevitably and immediately collapses. And that's exactly what we've seen happen.
Liberty?
Yeah, I think Will's insight there is spot on, that this does expose the weakness of a globalized economy. And I think that even if people can't really articulate that, that's why there is so much feeling of unsettledness. And I think that you have, seen so many more people start leaning populist in a way and nationalist. And it's just, I think that people are sensing that even if they can't exactly put their finger on it. And so it's interesting to watch what's going to happen in the Supreme Court, because on, the American side, on Trump's side anyway, he's definitely, as you said many times, trying to push the boundaries of his executive authority. And I think it will set precedents for future presidents to see what does that really mean. And we'll see how it all turns out for Trump.
And, it's a tough balance, isn't it? Because we like it when Honda and Toyota and Nissan come and build factories in the United States to make the cars that Americans buy from them. And so reciprocally, you would expect that Japan and other countries would like for us to go and build factories in their countries if those countries are buying a lot of our products. And Caterpillar does that. It sells an awful lot of products in China and other countries. And so you want to have a situation in which countries feel like they can come and build here and hire Americans to buy their products, and we can do the same without that being considered somehow or the other giving up sovereignty. Will?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think that notion of sovereignty and security is really what we're getting at here. I think in a lot of ways, kind of in every democratic society, once you achieve this baseline goal of security and you're able to maintain it for any prolonged period of time, well, the pendulum immediately starts to swing towards liberty, right? Like, why not? The notion is to be as free as possible, right? The problem, though, is that pendulum has stayed over there in that court of liberality so long now in the United States of America that it's not really freedom so much that the state has been pursuing, but rather abject liberality. And that's, I think, a little bit of a different thing. In a lot of ways, security in America, economic security, personal security, even your borders need to be completely reestablished post-Biden and Obama. And I think that's very much kind of that leads us back to this notion of sovereignty. You can't be sovereign if you're not secure.
We're talking about some of the issues today in our weekend edition on Point of View. We have links to several articles on our website, pointofview.net. I'd encourage you to go there and take a look at them because they sort of look at a number of the issues that are going on. There's also one from SCOTUS blog, which sort of highlights what was happening in the debate over tariffs at the Supreme Court. So I'd encourage you to go there and take a look. We'll be back on Point of View in just a minute.
Where does moral truth come from? According to 58% of Americans, individuals determine moral truth. A quarter of Generation Z says society determines moral truth, and morality can even change over time. Only 42% of Americans believe that truth comes from God. I don't know about you, but I find these numbers extremely troubling. It really is a crisis of truth, and that crisis has consequences. Look at society. Evil is called good, good called evil. People with biblical beliefs are called bigots, or worse, they're canceled. But there is hope. The Bible promises the truth will set us free, and that's why Point of View is relentless in our commitment to the ultimate source of moral truth, God's Word. At Point of View, we know that God's truth is eternal, and if we stand together, we can help more Americans apply His truth in their daily life. Help Americans find truth again by giving at pointofview.net or call 1-800-347-5151. That's pointofview.net and 800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this. You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again, Dr. Merrill Matthews.
And we're back with our weekend edition here on Point of View. Joining me by phone is political theorist Will Barclay and also Liberty Point of View's own Liberty McArtor. In Liberty, I listened to the arguments before the Supreme Court on Wednesday. It's a little over 2 hours, so it was long. But the Solicitor General, John Sauer, was making the case for the president's tariffs. And one of the things I thought he just got wrong. I mean, he's having to defend the tariffs not as a tax because the Constitution puts the power to tax in Article 1 and not Article 2, which has to deal with the president. But what he had to say was that the president's tariffs are they're the president trying to conduct foreign policy, that the money coming in from the tariffs was incidental. It was not something that's not part of the president's plan. The president's plan is to conduct foreign policy. It's just that the tariffs coming in because of that are incidental. And several justices on the Supreme Court seem to find that skeptical, and I did as well, because in the inauguration speech, President Trump, in his inauguration on January 20th, said he wanted to, he's going to issue an executive order seeing if they could eliminate the internal revenue service and create instead an external revenue service so that we can start taxing other countries to get to fund the government rather than our own people. And it just doesn't sound like these tariffs, the money coming in, was somehow or the other incidental to his plan.
Yes. Well, I did not watch 2 hours of oral arguments. So, but I'm reading the article. Good for you for watching it, and you can tell us all about it. But even just hearing you talk about it, immediately my mind went to, wait a second, isn't that what Trump's been saying this whole time? Is that this is going to be so good for the American people because it's going to bring in so much money?
Yes.
And so I do think that, that surprises me a little bit that that's their argument. And so it makes me wonder if they, really hedged their bets in a big way and said, hey, we're going to do this. And now they're kind of backing into some sort of legal argument and manipulating things a little bit. But that does seem to be one of Trump's selling points up to this point. And yet it doesn't seem to be panning out that way, which is why I think so many, Americans and the small business owners and everything are saying, look, this is really hurting us.
The general consensus among the various media reports that I read about it was that and I agree with this, that the Supreme Court generally seems skeptical. So I think there's a good chance the tariffs will not go forward as they are envisioned right now. But there are other ways that the president can do tariffs. So it wouldn't surprise me if the Supreme Court says, what you've been doing so far, we are striking that down. But that doesn't mean you can't continue with some tariffs in some fashion, some way, as several past presidents have imposed tariffs here and there, but usually for a limited time, for a specific purpose, and what might clearly be a national security issue. So I think the president's going to lose on this, at least in part, but the administration has come out and said, even if the Supreme Court strikes it down, we have other ways to keep the tariffs going. And that bothered me a little bit, because when the Supreme Court struck down Biden's student loan forgiveness program, then the Biden administration came up and said, well, okay, we lost on that, but we have other ways. And we kind of pushed back on that, saying, wait a minute, Supreme Court said you can't do this, and now you're going to go ahead and do it anyway. You're just going to say you're doing it under a different law. So I hope we see something different. The president does have some authority to impose tariffs, but I'm not sure it's going to be like they have as he's done it so far. At any rate, there may be some changes. Do you think that will hurt the president, Liberty?
Well, it's interesting, and I know that later in a little bit we'll be talking about monarchies and things such as that. So with regard to his base, I don't know if trying to expand his executive authority will really hurt him politically. I do think it'll be interesting, like you said, to see the outcome of this case, because even if it doesn't go exactly the way the administration is wanting it to go, it will likely create some precedents that will guide future actions down the road. So I could be wrong on this. I'm not a constitutional lawyer, of course, or anything like that. But it does seem like with some of the ways that Trump is pushing the boundaries or testing the limits of his executive authority, that there seems to be a goal. And then, okay, well, how can we make this fit in with the Constitution? How can we make a constitutional case for it rather than just operating within kind of the obvious bounds? But I mean, I know that there has been a lot of precedent bending and changing and everything over time, so that's not necessarily a bad thing, but it does seem that he's very motivated by his initial goals first, and then is going to try to find a way to get it done.
Will, I assume Canadians would go, whew, we dodged a bullet if the Supreme Court strikes that down.
Oh, absolutely. It would, I think, provide a lot of economic relief for everybody over here in Canada, despite the fact that it did expose a lot of underlying issues. I mean, are the problems we have at our border, both with regard to kind of the export and import of terrorism, narcotics, and crime, I think is a very real thing that we do need to move on, and it was very much highlighted. I think one of the things that the tariffs did also expose is the fact that Canada kind of teeters on the brink, or at least displays the quintessential hallmarks of a failing state. We're unable to maintain a monopoly on the use of force or violence within our own borders. And again, we're unable to secure our own borders, so we do display those two quintessential hallmarks. I think, too, though, that funny enough, from my own perspective, I think that from an IR perspective, tariffs should generally be considered to be part of foreign policy. But I think that might be a little distinction between kind of IR and then the legal field.
Yeah, the general. There have been times where Congress has given the president some authority to impose tariffs, but as I said, usually for a limited period, specific purpose. And even the one that the Ontario government ran with Ronald Reagan, he made the case. This was in 1986. He said, "I'm loath to do this, to impose this tariff on Japan, but they aren't living up to their agreement, so he was imposing a tariff because of certain changes or some restrictions they were putting on semiconductors at the time, but it was meant to be limited and targeted at one specific thing and to change one element of it, not sort of a sweeping tariff that goes for everything, which you can make the case for tariffs in certain cases. It's harder, I think, to make it, we're going to pose it on everyone, including Antarctica, for just as a policy purpose. But we had elections here, and the mayor of New York, the mayor-elect of New York, is a Democrat socialist, and you're writing about the issue of progressives actually sort of beginning to push back on conservatives and actually taking control. There was a time when we thought maybe conservatives were sort of in the forefront of taking over, but some of the politicians, it's not the case, and you think that's true in Canada too.
Oh, absolutely. All right-wing ideology and every conservative has become very much persecuted and oppressed in Canada over the course of the past liberal decade. Since 2015, all left-wing pundits and politicians through Canada have mimicked everyone over in America and deployed populism and populists and catch-all terms for all right-wing ideology and very much every conservative. And unfortunately, though, they've also labored tirelessly in order to transform populism into a euphemism for neo-Nazis and tyrants and all species of bigots. And in an attempt to silo all conservative ideology under this false veneer of fascism and discredit the surge in popularity that all right-wing ideology, like you said, very much has enjoyed in Canada and throughout the international political system post-Trump. I think in contrast, though, the left-wing political edifices very much dominate Canadian society, have hailed left-wing ideology as the driver of all socio-political progress since the Enlightenment, pretty much. And they've invariably associated a left-wing ethos with the democratic ideal. So as a result, they've engineered a political spectrum wherein a person becomes increasingly evil and antithetical to democracy in as much as their political beliefs become conservative or let's say populist or even worse. And conversely, they become increasingly good and virtuous in as much as their beliefs become left-wing and liberal. And so for over a decade, Canadians everywhere have been subsumed within this political ecosystem where every right-wing ideology is not merely a competing ethos, but rather inherently evil on a lot of levels, and therefore explicitly dangerous to the well-being of any democracy, and something that has to be eradicated and destroyed along with its adherents. And what's chilling is there's been a state-sponsored element to all this. The government has literally violated the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms, and it now seeks to give itself new powers via legislation, the Combating Hate Act, to do more of the same.
The here in the States recently, in the last few years, we've been associating populism with a right-wing slant, but you can have populists on the left side, can't you?
Oh, absolutely. I think Justin Trudeau, our previous, our disgraced, I should say, Prime Minister, is probably the best example of that. Like I was saying, he literally violated our Charter of Rights and Freedoms in order to impose his own beliefs upon Canadian society during the COVID pandemic. And this isn't just me saying this, is the Supreme Court. And I don't think that you get anything really more fascist than that, let's say, right? Using the apparatus of government in order to quiet and censor innocent citizens. I think that what we've seen in a lot of ways is rule of populism has been trotted out in order to frighten and scare people away from that right wing of the political spectrum.
And stay with us. We'll be right back on Point of View.
My walking route often includes a nearby high school's grounds with a stop to look at the seniors' beautifully painted parking spaces. Many high schools allow seniors to pay for a space and then paint it with a picture or message that reflects their personality or interests. Most schools require that artwork be approved by administrators. Academy School District 20 in Colorado Springs, Colorado, follows guidelines that prohibit messages it deems offensive, negative, rude, gang-related, political, religious, or trademarked images. Sophia Shoemaker is a senior at one of the schools in that district, Ramparts High School. She planned to decorate her parking space expressing her faith through her artwork. She submitted her design, a shepherd on a hill, his staff, a sheep, and a Bible verse, which she told a local news station represents God leaving the 99 sheep to go find the one sheep that's lost. The school rejected it. School policy stated that if a student's first design is not approved, there's only one chance to change it. If the artwork is again denied, the student forfeits their parking spot. Sophia created a second design, a non-religious picture with a well-known scripture reference from 1 Corinthians 13. But a teacher told her, not sure it would get approved. Sophia sought help from First Liberty Institute. The firm's attorney sent a demand letter to the district, pointing out that several of its schools do allow religious messages, and urging the superintendent to reverse Rampart's denial and correct district guidelines. First Liberty attorney Keisha Russell announced that the school agreed it will now allow Sophia to repaint her original design. In August, First Liberty resolved a similar complaint for another student, Sabrina Steffens of Grand Island, New York. Ms. Russell says the First Amendment protects students' private expressions of faith in public schools. Sometimes, school officials need to be reminded that students have these rights. For Point of View, I'm Penna Dexter.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
And we're back on Weekend Edition. Will, Mandami is clearly, he's an unashamed democratic socialist, and he's going to be the most left-wing politician we've had, I think even more so than Bill de Blasio, that was the one of the former mayors. Do you see this as the debate here in the States has been, is this the trend? Is this the energy of the Democratic Party, or will traditionalists sort of pull it back? But it seems like this is where the Democratic Party's going.
Yeah, so I think I've said this before. I think Mamdani's whole phenomena and election is very much a symptom of the fact that the modern left has long ago rejected all notion of an objective truth and any unwavering good and evil from the political discourse and paradigm. As a result, modern leftist ideology has left leftists utterly bereft of any true meaning, and so they constantly struggle to imbue their lives with purpose. And so they're forced to constantly manufacture and insert themselves into political conflict in an effort to once more provide their lives with meaning and briefly stave off the abortive spiral into depression and oblivion that inevitably awaits any long-term adherent of left-wing ideology who maybe introspects for too long. I think more importantly, though, until modern left-wing ideology begins to once more acknowledge and accept that this notion of objective good and evil within its political ideology and discourse, leftists are very much doomed to continue sporadically erupting into violence and angst in an effort to once more imbue their lives with some modicum of meaning. I think that on one hand, we could look at Mamdani as exactly like this, an attempt by modern leftists to do violence against the United States of America and mainstream society, particularly in New York City. Star Wars, obviously, I'm guessing. I think in a lot of ways, modern leftists have slaughtered America in as the evil empire because it's a necessary aspect of indulging in their own drama and playing themselves at being Luke Skywalkers and Han Solos in some warped rebel alliance.
Liberty, the people can push back on this a little bit. Democrats can say and say, the new governor, the governor-elect of Virginia and New Jersey, they tended to try to be a little bit more moderate, a little more centrist Democrat rather than the far-left Zoran Mamdani. But I don't know. It just doesn't seem to me that that's where the real energy in the Democratic Party is right now.
Yeah, I kind of am skeptical of the powers in the Democrat Party, so to speak, Democratic Party, are going to really effectively push back against the more radical wing. I think that's something that we've seen for a long time, is that they want that energetic base, and so they want to appeal to that base of the disenchanted voters, the young voters that are very ideological and a more extreme, and they want those votes. They want to energize that base, and they, have really catered to them, I think, more so than the center of the country. And so I think that's part of the reason why we've seen Trump, and now for a second term as well. So I'm not very confident, and unfortunately, I think that's why you have a party where there is such a comfort with, blatant anti-Semitism and even with Kamala Harris picking her running mate, last year, she avoided a more centrist Democrat that would have made sense for a lot of people, Governor Shapiro, because she didn't want to anger the extreme wing of the party with a Jewish vice presidential candidate. So I think that they've kind of, put their flag there on the far left side, and I think that's probably where they're going to stay.
It's interesting because I went on to Real Clear polling earlier today just to see kind of where the polls are, and Trump's poll numbers have been dropping. He's underwater. It had been running sort of 45% approve, 55% disapprove. I think the average of Real Clear polling now has him around 43%, which is terrible. But the only thing worse was the approval of the Democratic Party. So if you've got the majority of Americans not really liking Trump, but even more Americans not really liking the Democratic Party, it's hard to know where this is going to go.
Yeah, it is. And I think, what's underlying a lot of what we're seeing on both the right and the left is just, again, kind of disenchantment with the American dream, especially for younger generations. There are people that are suffering economically, or even if they're not suffering technically, they are not seeing the same success for putting in what they look as the same effort as their parents or grandparents' generation. And so I think a lot of that kind of middle class frustration among young, educated millennials and Gen Z really led to Mamdani's victory. And I think you see the same thing on the right too, but either way, you're looking for either a figure or some sort of governmental structure to give you that hope. And I think Will was right there. As we kind of lose our spiritual center as a society, people are looking for more answers and fulfillment in politics. And so it's going to lean very populist and nationalist on one side, and then on the other side, it's leaning more towards socialism. But both are still kind of asking that same question of who can we look to save us from this.
Will, can socialism win in America, you think?
I absolutely not. It better not. I think it's really one of the worst things that could happen in a lot of ways. I think I said this very recently. We have to take every opportunity to reject Zoran communism and socialism. I think that what I'd like to stress is that a free market economy is not merely the ideal economic mode, but it is the only ethical economic system. Any socialist state, any communist economy is not merely grossly inefficient, unproductive, but it's also immoral and constantly in conflict with the fundamental human rights of any people. What is the free market, ultimately, but an effort to reject every aspect of a hierarchical or stratified society and provide every citizen with an identical opportunity to not really participate in the political process, but earnestly self-determine, not just economically, but politically, and that's important. I think that at the end of the day, anyone who wants to call themselves a defender of democracy or human rights has to accept a free market economy, not an attempt to immolate it like Zoran and other communists and socialists.
You know, one of the challenges we have in the States here is that oftentimes and I've gone back and looked at this, when we have had a president run 2 full terms and then not run again, it nearly always flips the party. And so at least one of the question marks that's coming here is Donald Trump will have, after the end of this term, have filled 2 full terms, but they weren't consecutive terms. So I don't know if if the public looks at him as sort of a one-timer or 2 full terms, but we often have pendulum swings here in the States, and if one person's been in for a while, we swing that pendulum back the other way, and that could open the door for Democrats, and I think some of them are seeing an opportunity now.
Yeah, I don't disagree with you at all. I think, though, that we have to keep in mind, though, that conservatism is on the upswing. I think we said it before. It's on the upswing. It's ascendant in America. Conservatives, if not Republicans, are still winning, especially among the youth, and the youth is the future. And as I said, around the world, even in America, young people everywhere have overwhelmingly embraced conservative ideology. And even using my own home in Canada as an example, at the end of our most recent election, data showed that Canada's youth would have elected a conservative government rather than our current liberal one, and continue to kind of perpetuate those same liberal sins in government authoritarian. So the youth has definitely become aware of all this. I think nearly everywhere, everyone is looking for some kind of guidance, and that guidance is inevitably structure, and that structure does come with conservatism. I think in a lot of ways we can really boil things down in this world, at least in this moment, to 2 things, and energy and structure. And there's an awful lot of energy in the world right now, nervous energy, unfortunately, and precious little structure, what we would call objective values. Yeah, and I think that this is as a result of the past liberal decade and this constant pursuit of, again, this abject liberality. And so that energy has inevitably become anxious, scared, angry, and even violent.
You know, to your points, several countries in South America have been drifting back towards a little more moderate or conservative person in their election. So maybe you're right. Maybe we'll see a trend in that. Well, I want to thank you for joining us. I know you're leaving us this hour. Liberty is going to be with us next hour. Also joining us next hour, Richard Lim, as we move into some of the other issues that have been affecting the country this week. And my goodness, there's so many of them. So stay with us. We'll be back on Point of View.
It was not that long ago that censorship appeared to be almost inevitable. Free speech was being attacked and strangled in many places. And some of us wondered if this was the end. But now, many feel a new sense of hope, a chance for a fresh dawn. Let me caution you, now is not the time to relax. It's a time to press forward, to use this fresh opportunity to proclaim and learn how to apply truth to current issues. By the fact you're here, listening right now, that tells me that you recognize the vital role Point of View plays as a voice of truth. For more than 50 years, we've informed and equipped people who have made a real difference. And when you give to Point of View today, you breathe life into what can be a new golden era for the truth. Please, take a moment right now and invest in truth. Visit pointofview.net or give it 1-800-347-5151. That's pointofview.net. Click in now or call 1-800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this.
I just wanted to tell you, too, how much I have appreciated Point of View over the years. I've always been taught that we take care of our own, and I feel like Point of View is one of our own because of the Christian worldview that you do promote. And so I have become a partner today, and I just want to thank you so much, and just God bless you for all that you do.
Listen, I wanted to make a quick comment. I'm a relatively new listener to the show, and I really kind of stumbled upon it more than anything because I'm doing some driving now that I wasn't in the past. And my comment really is, I think you guys and gals are more right on about the assessment of this country right now than anything I've heard. You know, I go home and I tell my wife, you've got to hear what they're talking about on the show. It's just so right on. And I tell my parents the same thing.
I'm 25 years old, and I started listening to Point of View about 4 years ago, and it has changed the way that I think and the way that I view the world around me.
Point of View Radio Talk Show.
Hi, this is Kirby Anderson. You know, each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging. Apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View continues right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, Dr. Merrill Matthews.
And welcome back to Point of View. We're talking about, this is our weekend edition, so we're covering issues from the week. Joining me and staying with me is Liberty McArtor. She is with Point of View. She's the host of the Know Why podcast and frequently appears on Point of View's Next Generation Roundtable. Also joining me by phone is Richard Lim. He is our go-to person on presidential history. He has the podcast, The American President. He writes for the Heritage Foundation's Daily Signal and covers a number of areas of policy and history. Richard, thank you for joining us.
Good to be here, Merrill and Liberty.
You know, Richard, this past hour, the first hour, we talked a good bit about the government shutdown. And before we go into some of the other topics, I just wanted to get your thoughts on how the government shutdown's going. What do you think is going to happen? How this is working out?
Well, you know, this is one of those things where government shutdowns are usually very tricky, especially for leadership in Congress, because if you look at past shutdowns, the president has such a big bully pulpit that he's able to frame the narrative more than Congress is able to do so. I think you're looking at a lot of polls where both sides are basically saying, oh, the American people are blaming the other side for what's happening for the shutdown itself. I think that the administration has framed this shutdown as well as any administration has ever framed any shutdown, because I think most people understand that the reason why this shutdown is happening is because the Democrats want basically to keep a lot of their programs, their Obamacare subsidies, and they also want to allow illegal immigrants to have health care. And so I think this is one of those things where Trump has learned from the previous shutdown on how to frame the messaging around it. And I think it's succeeding better than in the past.
There's been a lot of debate as to who is winning the argument, Republicans or Democrats. The general reporting right now seems to say that Democrats, after the election, feel sort of emboldened that they didn't get hurt by the shutdown and feel like they can continue on. I know Trump has told the senators, Republican senators, he feels like they're getting killed on this issue. How do you feel this hurts the Republicans or Democrats, or does it hurt either?
You know, that's a good question. It's very hard for me to see the needle moving when it comes to Donald Trump, because what you see is what you get. I don't know if anyone's opinion will change about Donald Trump, even with this shutdown. You know, I think this is one of those situations where both sides are going to declare victory, and both sides are going to look at you know, basically what they get out of this. They're going to look for something that they can get out of this, some sort of compromise, and they're going to kick the can to the next shutdown, not long from now. So I think it's going to be one of those things that could be a draw in the end. I think Donald Trump is, his base of support is strong no matter what happens, even in this kind of shutdown. So, yeah, I don't know to be one of those conclusive winner, conclusive loser kind of situations.
That's one of the downsides of this. The continuing resolution that the Republican House passed was to go keep the government funded, I think, if I remember right, to like mid-November or so, and we're almost there. So now they're looking at passing some kind of continuing resolution that might take it through the end of the year. But you sort of hint at this. It's even if we get a resolution to the shutdown next week, that doesn't necessarily mean we're sort of past all this, because it probably just kicks the can down the road for a month or two.
Yeah, that's exactly right. I mean, just enough for the politicians to figure out their next move. And sadly, that's just been the way things have gone for I don't know how long. I mean, I remember the days of sequestration where they were trying to find a final, a kind of like a silver bullet. They created this special committee to resolve all these issues after America elected a leftist president, Obama, but a Tea Party Congress. And so we've had this situation ever since, and I think that's unfortunately the new norm.
One of the problems is that there is a constitutional process of how this is supposed to go, where the House votes on, I think there's 11 or 12, I think 12 different bills. The Senate's supposed to vote on those 12 bills. They get together and work out each of those bills. So it's like defense, education, health care, funding the government and so forth. And then they resolve those and pass them, and then you have the government funded. But we really haven't been able to do that in decades now. It seems to always come down to some kind of continuing resolution.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And I think, ultimately, before anyone goes down the both sides argument, I think ultimately what you're seeing is the fact that there is one party in this country that basically thinks that every problem can be solved by money. And if you tell them that's not possible, that you're responsible for kicking grandma to the curb and killing children and whatnot, and that's the Democratic Party. They simply do not want to do anything to reform entitlements, to do any kind of common sense measures and stop the growth of government, and that's the real cause of this. Back
in the 90s, Senator Phil Gramm of Texas at the time was trying to move legislation to keep people from being able to, seniors from being able to hide their assets and then go onto Medicaid to pay for the long-term care, so that the government would pay for the nursing home. In some cases, you had seniors who had significant assets, who had what we called elder care attorneys who would help them hide those in ways that the government wouldn't count them, so that they could get government funding. And Senator Gramm tried to pass an amendment to that, which I think, which the Democrats I think they called it "throw granny from the cliff" legislation. And that, it just, when you get something like that out there, it's just very hard to fight saying we're not trying to throw grandma from the cliff. And they had to push back on it. And I don't think it ever actually changed. So you still have a situation where sometimes wealthy, or at least higher income people with assets who retire, go into the nursing home, are able to hide those and put them into Medicaid, which isn't necessarily good because Medicaid doesn't pay very well for some of these nursing homes, and you sometimes have to take a lower standard nursing home in order to be able to do it. My guest for this hour is Richard Lim. He is our presidential expert. We go to him on all things presidential, and also Liberty McArtor, who is with Point of View. When we come back, one of the things we've been talking about is the shutdown and what are Democrats holding out for. And one of the things they're holding out for is a continuation of enhanced subsidies in Obamacare. And that's one of the things Republicans are trying not to do. They don't want to do that if they can keep from it. So when we come back, we'll talk about that. I've got a piece in the Hill from this last week, which highlights what was happening there and what that's all about. So I'd encourage you to go to pointofview.net and look at that. You can download that from the Hill. Also, while you're there on pointofview.net, you can hit that donate button and provide some funds for Point of View. We are a listener-funded radio network program. When we come back, we're going to go and talk a little about what's behind the shutdown, and then Tucker Carlson. He's been making headlines this week. Stay with us. We'll be back on Point of View.
This is Viewpoints with Kirby Anderson.
In America, we are facing a housing divide. We talk about a digital divide that illustrates the gulf between those who have computers and the internet and those who don't. There's a growing divide between those who have homes and those who do not and may never own a home. Baby boomers are sitting on a staggering amount of housing wealth, estimated at $19 trillion worth of real estate. They hold nearly half of the nation's real estate wealth. This is due to decades of home ownership and rising property values. One survey found that 62% of baby boomers feel that they have gained more wealth from their homes than from their careers. For them, their home equity represents the primary source of retirement income. On the other hand, the latest statistics indicate the U.S. housing market has reached its most unaffordable level in history. Home ownership is moving further out of reach for most Americans. Record high home prices and high mortgage rates have combined to outpace wage growth. In fact, Americans need to earn about 70% more today than 6 years ago to afford the median price home. The latest report from Realtor.com shows that only 28% of homes currently for sale across the country are affordable for the typical U.S. household. This is attributed to an increase in the number of people who want to buy homes, coupled with the fact that developers have underbuilt. All of this may be true, but it ignores the obvious reason. The price of homes is going up because the value of the dollar is going down, and it takes more dollars to buy the same home a decade later. And as inflation rises, wages never keep up. The housing divide is due to a government spending too much and the Federal Reserve printing too much. I'm Kirby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
For a free booklet on a biblical view of anti-Semitism, go to viewpoints.info/antisemitism. Viewpoints.info/antisemitism. You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
And welcome back to Weekend Edition. My guest by phone is Richard Lim and Liberty McArtor. And Liberty, the part of this, the reason for the shutdown is that Republicans wanted to pass a clean continuing resolution without the enhanced subsidies. So just for our listeners' background, when Obamacare passed in 2010 and then it went into effect in 2014, it provides subsidies for people up to 400% of the federal poverty level, which is a long way from poverty. But they provide subsidies for people who want to go into Obamacare, get the Obamacare coverage. They get subsidized. For lower income people, the taxpayers essentially cover most or all of the cost of the insurance premiums. But then the pandemic came along and the Democrats under Joe Biden enhanced that subsidy and made it much larger and also reduced some of the copays. And those were set to go away at the end of 2025 this year. And so they won't be there anymore. And what they're struggling over right now is Republicans are saying, let's go back to traditional Obamacare with the traditional subsidies, and we're not going to provide the funding for the enhanced subsidies that were put in during a pandemic. And Democrats are saying, if you don't include the enhanced subsidies, we aren't going to pass this thing. We're going to let it sit in a government shutdown. And my goodness, it's hinging on this issue of the enhanced subsidies for Obamacare. And when I listen to the news, most of them don't talk about the enhanced subsidies. They talk about subsidies, which makes it sound like there won't be any subsidies unless the Republicans pass it. So it's become a real tussle out there.
Yes, and I'm so glad that you articulated those details, because that is a lot of the nuance that you don't really hear much. And something else that your article does a great job of is exposing all the loopholes and the fraud and everything that these policies are being taken advantage of. And so of course, the Democrats don't want to highlight all of that, but I think it's very relevant. And again, just relevant to remind people that, it's not an elimination of Obamacare. It's going back to the way it was before. So there are so many little details in there that I think Republicans are right to want to address.
And they want to address a number of these problems here. And you could save so much money in the healthcare system, as you mentioned. I highlight the fraud. Fraud used to be really the U.S. organized crime used to be heavily into Medicare and Medicaid fraud. Now it's become so lucrative that foreign organizations have gotten in there. And kudos to the Bondi Justice Department, because they have been going after some of these. And I'm reading a couple here, some of the fraud that they under current rules. That's not it. But now it's not wanting to go there. Anyway, it's
well, some of the things that, just to jump in, you highlighted are foreign crime rings that are taking advantage of these humongous loopholes and are actually again fraud, taking advantage of these policies. And so just laundering money and fraudulent claims. And so I had not seen that before until you highlighted that and realized how big of a problem it was that even international crime rings are getting involved in it. So again, people need to check out your article at the website because people probably are not hearing about that.
Yeah, my iPad got stuck and it's not wanting to roll right now. But that's we highlight some of those from both Pakistani and Russian organized crimes, and these are international organizations. And then also the President President Biden passed the Inflation Reduction Act, which did a number of things with the drug companies. And now, to Trump's credit, he has been negotiating with the drug companies to lower some of their prices. And one of the things I think people don't often realize is that there is most of the drugs, prescription drugs, go through middlemen called pharmacy benefit managers. And their role was to go and negotiate discounts with the drug companies and then distribute these to the pharmacies and pass these savings on to the pharmacies so that you consumers would be able to get much lower prices on your drugs. A lot of that money gets stuck with the pharmacy benefit managers. And so now President Trump has been pushing the drug companies, and they're doing what I think they should have done some time ago, bypassing the pharmacy benefit managers, the PBMs, and they're starting to open up online. In fact, I think Trump is doing one called Trump Online or Trump Drug Discount or something like that, where you can go and you'll be able to buy some of the drugs, especially some of the Ozempic and Wegovy and those type of drugs for significantly reduced. Yes. Oh, Trump RX, that's it. Yes, Trump RX. And you'll be able to get these drugs at a significantly reduced price by bypassing the middlemen. So that's a major change, and we'll see what happens if that continues. And, Mark Cuban here in the Dallas area 3 or 4 years ago set up his I think it's called Cost Plus Drugs, Cuban's Cost Plus Drugs, and they go out and buy the drugs at the wholesale price and sell them for cost plus 10% markup, and they are significantly less expensive than you can go to the retail pharmacy and get them. So it can be done, but you have a lot of things in the middle that the middlemen that end up taking a lot of money from this, and so they're trying to figure out a way to get these drugs cheaper. But at any rate, it's one way to try to lower the cost of the healthcare system, and we can do that, but we haven't been able to do it so far, especially under the Biden administration. Richard?
Yeah, well, I think part of it is that the Republican Party has yet to really find its voice in messaging about what its alternatives are for healthcare. And,
very good point.
It's so easy to portray the Republicans as just wanting to take things away. Obamacare providing all these subsidies, and here are the Republicans that just want to take things away. But in reality, what they want to do is give people more choice, more freedom, allow for more competition. And I think the messaging of patient choice leads to lower prices. Something to that where you see more competition and I think if they were to kind of find their voice on that, we would be able to have more of an honest discussion, honest debate about what's happening here. Because, we've talked about fraud for a long time, but I think your article does such a great job of showing the mechanism of how that actually happens, how the Medicare, Medicaid fraud happens, ending hospital billing loopholes, why that's so important. So I think that it's a good start to an honest debate about it, and I hope that we see more of that.
Well, Richard, you mentioned Republicans have not put forward a good plan, and you're right. In the policy debates we've had over the years, we just said that Republicans didn't get the health care gene, meaning they didn't care much about it. It wasn't their issue. It was the Democrats' issue, but they have been beaten up over it for some time. And even when they wanted to repeal Obamacare, they did not have a Republican plan that they could go forward with and say, we want to replace Obamacare with this, and they don't have one now. So it would be better if Republicans were out saying, we don't want to include these enhanced subsidies, but here's what we're going to do instead, and yet they haven't been doing that, Liberty.
Right. It's very much a push against back what the other side is doing, and I think what a lot of people would like to see is that positive vision and positive plan that just kind of is a common sense solution to it. But hopefully that's something that we'll see. And I would say that at least, especially with...
We may have lost Liberty. Well, Richard, when we come back from the break in a minute, we want to go to your new study that you've been highlighting on presidential rankings. And so you've got that available. Is that Prager University? We've got a link to that on pointofview.net. But you've gone through and you took a survey, and people rated who they thought were the best and the worst presidents. And it can be a little surprising. And I was thrilled to see that Franklin Delano Roosevelt was way down the list. He oftentimes comes up as the first person or the second person, and thankfully he's way down on the list.
Some would say he should be even lower, I'll tell you that. He had a very high standard. There was a very high standard deviation, so there were a few people that would give him high marks and then many who gave him zeros, and so it kind of averaged out to right in the middle. But I know a lot of people that say he should have been lower.
I would be one of those people who would put him even lower. I had on Tuesday, I had Senator Phil Graham in talking about economic myths, and one of them is that the Franklin Delano Roosevelt coming in 1932, actually it gets inaugurated in 1933, that he was actually sort of saved capitalism and pulled us out of the Depression, when in fact that's not the case. So, but a lot of people still give him credit. You're listening to Point of View. We have links to all these articles we've been talking about today on pointofview.net, so I'd encourage you to go and take a look at those. When we get back, we'll talk to Richard Lim about the new presidential ranking. We have a link for that on pointofview.net, and take a look at that and see if you agree with some of the ones that they've highlighted as the highest and the lowest ranked presidents. So stay with us. When we come back, we'll turn to presidential rankings here on Point of View.
In 19th century London, two towering historical figures did battle, not with guns and bombs, but words and ideas. London was home to Karl Marx, the father of communism, and legendary Baptist preacher Charles Spurgeon. London was in many ways the center of the world, economically, militarily, and intellectually. Marx sought to destroy religion, the family, and everything the Bible supports. Spurgeon stood against him, warning of socialism's dangers. Spurgeon understood Christianity is not just religious truth, it is truth for all of life. Where do you find men with that kind of wisdom to stand against darkness today? Get the light you need on today's most pressing issues delivered to your inbox when you sign up for the Viewpoints commentary at pointofview.net/signup. Every weekday in less than 2 minutes, you'll learn how to be a person of light to stand against darkness in our time. It's free, so visit pointofview.net/signup right now. pointofview.net/signup. Point of View will continue after this. You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again, Dr. Merrill Matthews.
And welcome back to the weekend edition on Point of View. My guest by phone, Richard Lim, presidential historian and Point of View's own Liberty McArtor. And Richard, I'm looking at Prager University's new presidential ranking, and I generally agree, I think, with the first 9. But what I really like is I come down to number 37, Woodrow Wilson, number 38, Barack Obama, and number 42, Joe Biden. Can I get an amen?
Amen. Yeah, Joe Biden ended up dead last, and this is a survey that you participated in, I participated in, and a number of very prominent historians, impressive figures. 155 respondents, 75 of them have PhDs, and this is one of those things where the left is going to scoff at this list. They're going to be appalled that Roosevelt and Wilson and Obama and Biden were ranked so low, but this is a very impressive list of people, and so they, I think it shows, it's a very interesting window into what the conservative world, how they view American history, and it is one of those things where I think, a lot of people in the academy, and we have people from Princeton that responded, from Stanford, and they can try to silence people and their views, but they'll still have their views, and not everyone agrees that Franklin Roosevelt is the greatest president of all time. If you look at all the polls of historians, a lot of them have FDR as number one, and so I think this is really an antidote to that.
What was the most surprising finding that you had?
That's a great question. I would say that I think, it's not a shock that Reagan and Coolidge are beloved among conservatives, but I think to see just how beloved they are, the fact that Reagan's ranking is pretty close to Lincoln. Reagan is closer to Lincoln in the ranking than Lincoln is to Washington. Washington won, far and away number one, lowest standard deviation, so it's basically unanimous that he was the greatest president. Lincoln is number 2, but Reagan is not far behind him. I think also there were a number of presidents that there was actually a decent amount of agreement between liberals and conservatives about. A number of presidents like, say, the Andrew Johnsons and the James Buchanans and the Franklin Pierces, but even guys like Warren Harding and Richard Nixon. Personally, I think that Warren Harding deserves a better rating than he's gotten. We mentioned FDR and what he did during the Depression to make the Depression worse. Harding took over during the post-World War I, post-Wilson Depression, and he did basically exactly what you want a president to do during a depression, which is to leave well enough alone. He lowered taxes, he removed regulations, and the economy roared back, and that's how we got the Roaring '20s. And I think the only biggest criticism that you can have towards Harding were the scandals, but policy-wise, he was a good president. So it's interesting to me that conservatives haven't really examined him. They've kind of dismissed him as well. Same with Nixon. Certain presidents that get criticized by the left, who were Democrats, like Andrew Jackson and James Polk, I thought would rank a little higher. I thought Polk should have ranked higher just because you have maybe the most effective one-term president in American history with Polk, the expansion of America all the way to the coast. But it seems like conservatives have also kind of adopted some of the views about his quote-unquote controversial decisions, and they're not fully on board with his war against Mexico. So it's interesting that there is that kind of agreement between left and right, but at the same time, you have wide disagreement on the presidents, the big government presidents that the left lionizes. They end up ranking very low. And I'm glad to see a number of the unsung presidents, Coolidge, James Monroe, Grover Cleveland, finally getting some positive attention because they were actually much better presidents than Americans remember, if they remember them at all.
One of the things I was a little bit surprised about was Dwight Eisenhower coming in at number 6, not because he doesn't deserve a high rating, but because he's just so ignored as a president. I mean, people just sort of thought, nah, nothing was really happening at the time, but maybe that's a good thing now. But coming in 6 was a fairly high ranking for him.
Absolutely. And, I think it's one of those things, the default position of the way we view historical figures is that great figures do something. And I think that that's true when big things needed to be done. If there was a war and you needed to fight to liberate the country, sure. But lots of times in history, when when there isn't a war or a great crisis, the best thing to do is to not do something. And one of my favorite historians, Amity Schlaze, she participated in the survey. One of the great things she says about Calvin Coolidge is that it takes a lot of strength to say no. There are many times it takes strength for a president not to do something. When there's an economic crisis and there's all this pressure to act, like Grover Cleveland during his second term, lots of pressure for him to act because it was an economic crisis, to switch to a gold and silver standard, to inflate the currency. He said no. And the thing is that in our culture where doing something as a leader is the thing to do, actually it takes more strength not to do something. And he was the last Democrat, prominent Democrat, that really was not a progressive. He was a small government Democrat in the Jeffersonian tradition. And I think even as conservatives, we kind of fall for this idea that, a president does something. When in reality, and just like in life, sometimes the best people are the ones that quietly were faithful stewards of what they had. And that's a guy like Calvin Coolidge. And I think even as conservatives, we kind of need to evaluate, well, what do we think makes a great president? A lot of times it's the guy that didn't do something when he could have done it. And Dwight Eisenhower, all he did was give us peace and prosperity in the middle of the Cold War. That was not easy. But it's kind of seen as a quote unquote negative accomplishment, when in reality we should look at these leaders and say, hey, this guy kept it together, kept us out of war, helped unify the nation. And this is what we needed at the time, and this deserves respect, and I'm glad historians understand that about Eisenhower.
Liberty, one of the things I found interesting on this was that for people of your generation, the presidents that they would be most familiar with, Bill Clinton, George Herbert Walker Bush, George W. Bush, they come in right after Franklin Roosevelt. So you got Franklin Roosevelt at 20, then you got George Herbert Walker Bush at 21, George W. at 22, and then Bill Clinton at 23. So they're sort of in the mediocre range there.
Yeah, they're not super high, but this is such a great resource. And as somebody who loves American history and appreciates it, but I would say I am not up to par on my presidential knowledge. And so that's one of the reasons why I love your podcast, Richard. And this is such a great resource. In fact, I was finding that so interesting. I actually, one of the videos I watched from this was Coolidge. And that is such a good insight, too, about him being the great refrainer and how there is so much pressure in the moment to change things, to do something. But, great leaders take the long view as stewards, as you said, Richard. And so this is a great resource. So for homeschooling families, for anybody who just wants to learn more about American presidents and history, I mean, what a great resource. And again, the respondents are really a who's who of thinkers. A lot of them I admire, a lot of names people will recognize. And there's these, just go to the link that's up on the website and you can click through all the videos with these facts about these presidents. And it's just such an educational resource. And again, in a moment where there is so much pressure to constantly do something, I think Richard's right. Let's reflect on what does it mean to be a great president, and studying the past figures can teach us a lot of lessons.
Richard, I used to have a quote in my office from Calvin Coolidge, who they called Silent Cal. I wouldn't be opposed to a little more silence from our politicians these days, but Silent Cal, which this is a paraphrase, but I think it's going to be pretty close. That it's better to veto bad legislation than it is to pass good legislation, and it's a very interesting twist on that.
Absolutely, Calvin Coolidge was really one of the few presidents that really understood what America was about. And I say that because one of the most underrated presidential speeches is his 150th anniversary of America speech. It was July 4th, 1926, which was America's 150th birthday. And he spoke about what progressivism was. And he said, progressivism is this idea that the ideas of the past are outdated, obsolete, and we have reached a higher plane. We need to evolve and progress from those ideas. And he said, you can't do that with the American experiment, because the American experiment was born of absolutes. If all men are created equal, you can't progress from that. You can only regress.
Yes. Stay back. Stay with us. We'll be back in just a minute on Point of View.
My walking route often includes a nearby high school's grounds with a stop to look at the seniors' beautifully painted parking spaces. Many high schools allow seniors to pay for a space and then paint it with a picture or message that reflects their personality or interests. Most schools require that artwork be approved by administrators. Academy School District 20 in Colorado Springs, Colorado, follows guidelines that prohibit messages it deems offensive, negative, rude, gang-related, political, religious, or trademarked images. Sophia Shoemaker is a senior at one of the schools in that district, Ramparts High School. She planned to decorate her parking space expressing her faith through her artwork. She submitted her design, a shepherd on a hill, his staff, a sheep, and a Bible verse, which she told a local news station represents God leaving the 99 sheep to go find the one sheep that's lost. The school rejected it. School policy stated that if a student's first design is not approved, there's only one chance to change it. If the artwork is again denied, the student forfeits their parking spot. Sophia created a second design, a non-religious picture with a well-known scripture reference from 1 Corinthians 13. But a teacher told her, not sure it would get approved. Sophia sought help from First Liberty Institute. The firm's attorney sent a demand letter to the district, pointing out that several of its schools do allow religious messages, and urging the superintendent to reverse Rampart's denial and correct district guidelines. First Liberty attorney Keisha Russell announced that the school agreed it will now allow Sophia to repaint her original design. In August, First Liberty resolved a similar complaint for another student, Sabrina Steffens of Grand Island, New York. Ms. Russell says the First Amendment protects students' private expressions of faith in public schools. Sometimes, school officials need to be reminded that students have these rights. For Point of View, I'm Penna Dexter.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back with our final segment on today's Point of View, weekend edition, and one of the topics making news this week was Tucker Carlson. Tucker interviewed a person, Nick Fuentes, who is generally considered to be very anti-Semitic. Tucker did not give him a hard interview, challenging on things. He basically was a softball interview. That got a lot of reaction from conservatives who felt that he shouldn't be doing that. That ended up with a response from the president of the Heritage Foundation, Kevin Roberts, defending Tucker and calling him a longtime close friend of the Heritage Foundation, and they were not going to separate themselves from him because of that interview. Then Kevin Roberts, I think the next day or so, apologized to the Heritage staff because it looked like he was too supportive of Nick Fuentes. And that has raised the question of some of the things that Tucker has been saying, Liberty. And I'm looking at an article in the Free Press, which we have posted on Point of View, where Samuel Goldman is talking about sort of the history of the relation of the Christian church and its views on Israel. And it goes back to the Reformation and how that has moved forward. But he mentions in there some of the things that Tucker has been saying, and I'm reading from it. It says, this was not the first time Carlson has discussed what he called the brain virus of Christian Zionism. And Tucker has been very critical of Christians who are strongly supportive of Israel. He had a debate with Senator Ted Cruz about this, and Tucker seems to have been, I don't know how to describe it, but critical of a strong support of Israel from Christians. How do you see that, Liberty?
Well, I am glad that you posted the article because for people who maybe aren't as familiar with some of the, different schools of thought on
nuances,
dispensationalism, yes. or yes, exactly. They may be hearing these different conflicts talked about by pundits all of a sudden and really wondering, okay, well, what am I supposed to think as a Christian? So I think that this really, gets outside of some of the dichotomy that a lot of times people debate on social media today with regard to just kind of the theological perspective, and realize that support for the nation of Israel has been a consistent tradition in Christianity for a long time. And I think also it's important to realize that with regard to what we hear so often today, including from Tucker Carlson, unfortunately, and others, is that there's really, and I know you've written on this too, kind of a more than a whiff, really, but a lot of conspiracy theory kind of approach to it. It's not just criticizing Israel as a state or criticizing their current government. It really is leaning into very old tropes about, the powerful Jewish people running the world, manipulating our own government, and that not just saying, well, I disagree theologically and I interpret scripture this way, but then if you are a Christian who does support Israel, that's actually unchristian. So it's going beyond kind of a theological debate and biblical understanding and really crossing the line into some of that conspiracy theory territory. And I think people need to recognize that.
It's interesting because as strong as many Christians are in supporting Israel, including Ambassador Huckabee is in Israel as the U.S. ambassador to Israel, one of the first non-Jewish people to become the U.S. ambassador to Israel. You have others who claim to be Christian, Candace Owens being one, who argued that the shooting of Charlie Kirk was perhaps promoted or backed by Israel, and that they had a hand in doing that. And it's interesting to see this sort of dichotomy that's emerging among people who consider themselves conservative Christians, Richard.
Yeah, and I've never understood this conspiratorial view of Israel because, look, every country looks out for its own interests.
Mm-hmm.
It's not like Israel looks out for its own interests more than any other country. They might do it more in the sense that they, because the Jewish people have been persecuted so intensely over the centuries, that they are more sensitive to certain things and threats. But that's completely understandable given the fact that they live in a completely hostile neighborhood. They're a country that is smaller. It's smaller than New Jersey, and I've never understood this idea that somehow Israel is uniquely manipulative of other countries. I think it overcomplicates the situation. I mean, every country looks out for itself. Every country is flawed and makes mistakes, and it's not like Israel is any more flawed or mistaken than any other country in the world. And I think, they take this conspiratorial view that just ignores the fact that there is a real belief within, Christendom that Israel has a unique special role to play as God's people. And that doesn't necessarily mean that they're out manipulating the world. but that is the view of many Christians. That certainly was the view of President Harry Truman when he recognized Israel in 1948, right after Israel became a state. And so, yeah, I think it's a very bizarre kind of phenomenon right now going on within the right.
You know, Liberty, what I find interesting about this is apparently Megyn Kelly interviewed Tucker Carlson here just a few days ago and gave him a hard time about interviewing Nick Fuentes who is an anti-Semite. And Tucker pushed back pretty strongly against Megyn and essentially said, look, I'm just trying to find out what some of these other people think, how they think, what their views are. When that was the same explanation when he interviewed Vladimir Putin, which he also didn't do a very tough interview. He just basically let Vladimir Putin tell him what the Russian view was. But it's interesting because I don't see Tucker doing this with what he's calling Christian Zionism. He doesn't seem to be interested in trying to understand that. He seems to be mostly critical of it.
Yes, I think it's a disingenuous defense on his part. All we have to do is remember his interview with Senator Ted Cruz not too long ago, and there was a lot of pushback in that interview. And so I think people who want to come to his defense, or people who are kind of leaning more with Tucker Carlson and Candace Owens on this issue, would kind of present a straw man argument, like it's just free speech, it's just open dialogue, and don't cancel me. But yes, you want free speech so that you can speak true things, and you don't want to keep somebody from speaking or take away their legal right to say something. But then I think we have a moral obligation to speak truth and respond. And so when somebody has a big platform like that, it's not canceling to say, I'm going to steward my platform well, or even if I do want to allow it to kind of be this open forum, then let me have both sides. Let me have a true debate, or let me push back a little bit and give a challenging interview. And that's not what it was. It's just, sitting there and letting somebody spew conspiracy theories for 2 hours straight, or really dehumanizing things and not pushing back at all. That's not what free speech is supposed to be.
Well, Richard, I want to thank you for joining us, and thank you for bringing our attention to the PragerU presidential rankings. That was great. Thank you for joining us this time.
Thank you. Great to be with you guys.
And Liberty, where can people find out more about the Know Why podcast?
You can go to knowwhypodcast.com. We're also on YouTube or anywhere you listen to podcasts, and you'll find us there.
Thank you for joining us.
It's been great. Thank you.
And I want to reemphasize that you can find the articles that we've been mentioning on the Point of View website, pointofview.net. You'll be able to go, and I encourage you to go and take a look at those articles. And also hit the donate button while you're there. Provide some funding for Point of View. I want to thank Megan for engineering the program today, and I want to thank Steve for being the producer, and I want to thank you for joining us on Point of View.
At Point of View, we believe there is power in prayer, and that is why we have relaunched our Pray for America campaign, a series of weekly emails to unite Americans in prayer for our nation. Imagine if hundreds of thousands of Americans started praying intentionally together on a weekly basis. You can help make that a reality by subscribing to our Pray for America emails. Just go to pointofview.net and click on the Pray for America banner that's right there on the homepage. Each week you'll receive a brief news update, a specific prayer guide, and a free resource to equip you in further action. We encourage you to not only pray with us each week, but to share these prayers and the resources with others in your life. Join the movement today. Visit pointofview.net and click on the banner Pray for America right there at the top. That's pointofview.net. Let's pray together for God to make a difference in our land. Point of View is produced by Point of View Ministries.